The morning mist hung low over Willowbrook Forest, curling between ancient oaks and whispering through ferns that had witnessed countless seasons. It was in this forest, where sunlight filtered through canopies like liquid gold, that two very different creatures began their day. Harold the Hare stretched his powerful hind legs, feeling the familiar surge of energy that coursed through his body each dawn. His muscles were built for speed. His large feet evolved over generations to grip the earth and propel him forward like a brown streak across the meadows. He loved nothing more than the rush of wind against his ears, the blur of green and brown as the world became a watercolor painting around him. On the other side of the forest, near a sun-warmed rock beside the gentle creek, Theodore the Tortoise emerged from his burrow with considerably less fanfare. His shell, a magnificent dome of brown and amber plates called scutes, caught the early light. Each plate told a story of growth, of years spent navigating the forest floor at his own unhurried pace. His legs, sturdy and deliberate, carried the weight of his portable home with quiet dignity. Theodore had lived in Willowbrook Forest for nearly 60 years. He had watched saplings become towering trees. He had witnessed floods and droughts, harsh winters and abundant summers. And through it all, he had moved forward, step by measured step. Harold, by contrast, was young, barely 4 years old, and convinced that his speed was the greatest gift any creature could possess. The trouble began, as trouble often does, with a boast. Harold had gathered an audience near the old fallen log that served as the forest's informal meeting place. Squirrels perched on branches above, their tails twitching with interest. A family of deer paused their grazing to listen. Even the usually solitary fox had wandered close, curious about the commotion. "I am the fastest creature in this entire forest," Harold declared, thumping his foot against the ground for emphasis. "Perhaps the fastest in any forest. I ran from the eastern meadow to the western stream in the time it takes most of you to blink." The squirrels chittered appreciatively. Speed was something they understood after all. "There is nothing I cannot outrun," Harold continued, his chest puffing with pride. "No challenge too great, no distance too far. My legs are my fortune, and fortune favors the swift." It was then that Theodore emerged from behind a cluster of wild mushrooms, his ancient eyes taking in the scene with quiet observation. He had been making his way toward the creek, as he did every morning when Harold's voice had carried through the trees. Harold spotted him and laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the surrounding bark. "Well, look who's arrived hours after everyone else, no doubt. Tell me, old one, how long did it take you to travel from your burrow? A week? A month?" Theodore paused, regarding the young hare with an expression that held no anger, only a deep, weathered patience. "I left my burrow this morning," Theodore replied, his voice slow and measured like honey dripping from a spoon. "I stopped to watch the dewdrops on the spider's web near the birch grove. I paused to let a family of beetles cross my path. I took time to feel the warmth of the sun on my shell." Harold snorted. "And that's exactly why you'll never accomplish anything. While you're watching dewdrops, the world is passing you by." Theodore considered this for a moment, his wrinkled neck extending slightly as he lifted his gaze to meet Harold's. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps the world is passing you by while you race through it too quickly to see what it holds." The forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to still, as if holding its breath. Harold's nose twitched with indignation. "That's ridiculous! Speed is everything! I could reach the stone mountain at the forest's edge before midday. It would take you, what, a week? 2? "It would take me however long it takes," Theodore replied calmly. "But I would arrive." Something in the old tortoise's certainty irritated Harold more than any insult could have. "Fine then," the hare said, his voice sharp. "Let's settle this. A race, from here to Stone Mountain. We'll see whose way is better, your plodding patience or my superior speed." Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the forest creatures exchanged uncertain glances. Everyone knew how this would end. The hare would win easily, and the old tortoise would be humiliated. But Theodore simply nodded, a small, knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "Very well," he said. "I accept." The race was set for the following dawn. Word spread through the forest like fire through dry leaves, and by the time the first pink streaks appeared in the eastern sky, creatures had gathered from every corner of Willowbrook to witness the event. The starting line was marked by 2 fallen branches near the old log. The finish line, Stone Mountain, rose in the distance, a gray sentinel visible above the tree line. The path between them wound through dense woodland, across the meadow, over the rocky creek bed, and up the final slope to the mountain's base. It was perhaps 3 miles in total. For Harold, 3 miles was nothing. He could cover that distance in minutes if he pushed himself. Theodore positioned himself at the starting line, his shell gleaming in the early light. His expression was serene, focused, as if he were preparing for a simple morning walk rather than an impossible challenge. "Last chance to withdraw," Harold said, stretching his legs with exaggerated casualness. "No one would blame you." Theodore looked at him with those ancient, knowing eyes. "I have never withdrawn from anything in my life," he said quietly. "I do not intend to start now." The fox served as the official starter, and when she gave the signal, a sharp yip that cut through the morning air, Harold exploded forward. His powerful legs ate up the ground, his body becoming a blur of brown fur as he shot into the forest. Theodore began to walk. Within moments, Harold had disappeared from view, leaving the other creatures murmuring among themselves. Theodore paid them no attention. He simply moved forward, one deliberate step at a time, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Harold reached the first major landmark, the split oak with the lightning scar, in under 2 minutes. He paused there, his breathing barely elevated, and looked back. The starting line was invisible now, lost among the trees. And Theodore? Theodore was nowhere to be seen. Harold laughed to himself. "This is almost cruel," he muttered. "The old fool has no chance." He decided to rest for a moment. After all, what was the harm? He could afford to take a break, enjoy the morning, and still win by hours. He settled beneath the split oak, his ears twitching as he listened to the forest sounds around him. The morning was beautiful, he had to admit. Birdsong filled the air, a complex symphony of trills and whistles. A butterfly drifted past, its orange wings catching the dappled sunlight. Harold watched it lazily, feeling the warmth seep into his fur. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The warmth was so pleasant, the forest sounds so soothing. Harold's eyes grew heavy. Just a short rest, he told himself. Just a few minutes. Meanwhile, Theodore continued his journey. He moved through the forest with the steady rhythm he had maintained for 6 decades. He noticed the mushrooms growing at the base of a rotting stump. Lion's mane, good for the mind, his grandmother had once told him. He observed the way the light played through the leaves, creating patterns on the forest floor that shifted and danced with each passing breeze. A young deer appeared beside him, walking at his pace for a while. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You know you can't win." Theodore considered the question as he navigated around a fallen branch. "Winning," he said slowly, "is not always what we think it is." The deer looked puzzled but said nothing more, eventually bounding away to join her family. Theodore walked on. Harold woke with a start, his heart racing. The sun had moved significantly across the sky. It was now mid-morning, perhaps later. He had slept for hours. "No matter," he said, though a flicker of concern crossed his mind. "Still plenty of time." He bounded forward again, racing through the forest with renewed determination. The meadow opened before him, a sea of wildflowers and tall grass, and he crossed it in moments. The rocky creek bed presented no challenge either. He leaped across the stones with effortless grace. But at the base of the final slope, Harold paused. His legs were beginning to tire from the explosive bursts of speed. His breathing had grown heavier. He looked up at Stone Mountain, its gray face rising above him, and calculated the distance. Still far ahead, still plenty of time. He decided to rest again, just briefly. The shade of a large boulder beckoned, cool and inviting. Harold settled against it, telling himself he would only close his eyes for a moment. Theodore reached the meadow around midday. The sun was warm on his shell, and he moved through the tall grass with patient determination. Bees buzzed around him, collecting pollen from the wildflowers. A grasshopper landed on his shell, hitching a ride for a few yards before leaping away. The rocky creek bed was more challenging. Theodore had to choose his path carefully, testing each stone before committing his weight to it. Once, he slipped slightly, his foot sliding on a wet rock, but he caught himself and continued forward. It took him nearly an hour to cross what Harold had traversed in seconds, but he crossed it. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Theodore reached the base of the final slope, and there, curled against a boulder, was Harold, fast asleep. Theodore paused, regarding the sleeping Hare with something like compassion. He could have woken him. He could have gloated. Instead, he simply continued past, beginning the final climb toward Stone Mountain. The slope was steep, and Theodore's legs burned with the effort, but he had climbed many slopes in his long life. He had faced challenges that would have broken faster, more impatient creatures. He had learned that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible, as long as one simply refused to stop. Step by step, he climbed. The sun was touching the treetops when Harold finally woke. He stretched, yawned, and then froze. The light was wrong. The shadows were too long. How much time had passed? He scrambled to his feet and looked up at Stone Mountain. There, near the very top, moving with steady deliberation, was a small, brown figure. Theodore. Harold's heart nearly stopped. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no!" He launched himself forward with every ounce of speed he possessed. His legs blurred beneath him as he attacked the slope, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He had never run so fast in his life. But Theodore was close now, so close. The old tortoise could hear the thunder of approaching feet behind him. He could feel the vibration through the earth, but he did not look back. He simply focused on the next step, and the next, and the next. 10 feet from the finish line. 5 feet, 3. Harold was gaining, his desperate panting growing louder. 2 feet. 1. Theodore crossed the line. He had won. Harold collapsed beside him, his sides heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" he gasped. "How is this possible?" Theodore turned to look at him, his ancient face gentle rather than triumphant. "Because I never stopped," he said simply. "You are faster than me, Harold. That was never in question. But speed without persistence is like a river without a course. It spreads everywhere and reaches nowhere." Harold lay there for a long time, staring at the darkening sky as the first stars emerged. The forest creatures who had followed the race gathered around, but there was no mockery, no celebration at his expense. They simply watched, understanding that something important was happening. Finally, Harold spoke. "I've been a fool," he said quietly. Theodore lowered himself to the ground beside the exhausted Hare, settling his shell against the cool stone of the mountain. "You've been young," he corrected gently. "We all are once. The question is what we become after." In the weeks that followed, something changed in Willowbrook Forest. Harold still ran. It was in his nature after all. But he also learned to pause. He began visiting Theodore regularly, listening to the old tortoise's stories of decades past, learning to see the world at a different pace. And Theodore continued his daily walks to the creek, still stopping to watch dewdrops on spider webs, still pausing for beetles to cross his path. But now sometimes, a young hare would walk beside him, matching his pace, learning the quiet strength found in simply moving forward. Because in the end, Theodore knew life was not a race to be won, but a journey to be completed. And the only true victory was in never giving up.